Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Also, welcome to a new episode of Truly Horror, the series where we talk about the true stories, the true events, and true crimes surrounding certain horror movies. The behind the scenes stuff that is often stranger and scarier than the movies themselves. Today we are talking about the true story that inspired the 2005 movie Wolf Creek. Just a heads up that this episode does contain spoilers, so just bear that in mind if you haven't seen the film yet. Also, it's worth mentioning that this episode contains some pretty nasty content, not graphically or in great detail, but certainly referencing, so again, bear that in mind. Few human antagonists strike as much fear into the hearts of horror audiences than Mick Taylor, the antagonist of both the 2005 Wolf Creek and the 2013 sequel Wolf Creek 2. What makes him even more terrifying is the fact that Mick Taylor is actually based on a real-life serial killer. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about production and the movie itself, and then we'll talk about the two real-life events that inspired the story of Wolf Creek. Wolf Creek is an Australian horror film. It was written, directed and co-produced by Greg McLean. It was filmed on a budget of $1.1 million and made $27.7 million at the box office. Greg McLean originally wrote the screenplay for Wolf Creek back in 1997. So the story goes, the screenplay was originally more of a straightforward slasher, but McLean wasn't 100% happy with it. And after watching and reading media coverage of the crimes of serial killer Ivan Milat, McLean found the inspiration he needed to rewrite the screenplay. Along with the inspiration taken from the 2001 abduction and murder of Peter Falconio by Bradley John Murdoch, Wolf Creek evolved into the gritty, realistic and grindhouse-style movie that we know. Wolf Creek follows two British female backpackers, Liz and Christy, who are travelling across Australia with their Australian friend Ben. And as the group travels together, a romance begins to blossom between Liz and Ben. The group stop off at a rest stop but appear to attract the attention of a man in another vehicle. The three of them eventually make a stop at Wolf Creek National Park, but when they return to their car they find that the vehicle won't start and they're stranded. Hours later they are approached by a man named Mick Taylor who offers to tow them to his camp. The audience learn that this is the same man who spotted them at the rest stop. Back at the camp, things seem fine until the three fall unconscious, having been drugged by Mick. Liz awakens gagged in a shed, she breaks free and finds Christy tied up in a garage. She's in pretty bad shape and it's implied that Mick has assaulted her. The two women shoot Mick and escape in a truck, which they drive off a cliff to make Mick believe they went over the edge with it. Liz then returns to the camp to try find Ben and leaves Christy outside. Mick, having survived, also returns to camp where he attacks Liz. He stabs her, cuts her fingers off and finally stabs her in the spine, paralysing her. He then heads off to find Christy, who he chases down the highway. A passing motorist who tries to help Christy and Christy herself are both killed, shot by Mick. Ben awakens to find himself nailed to some wood back at the camp, but manages to escape. He's discovered by a Swedish couple and airlifted to hospital, and Mick Taylor lives to hunt another day. Ivan Robert Marco Milat was born on the 27th of December 1945. He was one of 14 children and the fifth born. The Milat family were by no means well off, but the father always worked and provided, first on the wharves in Sydney and then on his own tomato plantation that he started. The mother was dedicated to raising the children right through education and discipline. There were rumours that the father was a much stricter disciplinarian and could have a very foul temper after drinking. Now, I can't say what or why, but the Millet's strict raising of their children didn't go to plan, and 7 out of the 10 brothers ended up turning to crime and became well known to the police after several run-ins. The boys were not only known for petty crime, but for also having an arsenal of weapons at home, including knives and guns. Ivan Milat apparently showed signs of antisocial and psychopathic behaviour as a child, including attacking animals and causing them pain, which, while it doesn't always go hand in hand, we do see this in quite a few serial killers' childhoods. During the 1960s, in his teens and early 20s, Ivan Milat was sent to Juvenile Detention Centre for armed theft, prison for breaking and entering, and he did 2 years hard labour for driving a stolen car. As Ivan got older, the severity of his crimes increased, and in April 1971, Ivan abducted 2 18-year-old female hitchhikers near Liverpool railway station. He sexually assaulted one of the women, a Margaret Patterson, before both of them managed to escape when they stopped at a cafe. Ivan was arrested and the case went to trial, but he was eventually acquitted. Unfortunately, Ivan Milat's manner of abducting and assaulting these women would become the blueprint for future murders. Ivan Milat, now free, would go on to abduct and murder 7 people, 2 men and 5 women, aged between 19 and 22. All of the victims were hitchhikers or backpackers who went missing between 1989 and 1992. On the 30th of December 1989, James Gibson and Deborah Everest of Melbourne had set off from Sydney to Albury, near the border of New South Wales, for a festival. When they failed to show and friends and family didn't hear from them in the following weeks, a missing persons report was filed. Then, on the 20th of January 1991, Simone Schmidl from Germany left Sydney for Melbourne. Simone had arranged to meet her mother at Melbourne Airport a few days later, but never showed. Then later, on Boxing Day, the 26th of December 1991, Gabor Neugebauer and Anja Habschied, also from Germany, left Sydney. They had planned to walk 4,000 kilometres to Darwin before returning home, but again, they never arrived home. And then in April 1992, 2 women, Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark, both from Wales in the UK, left Sydney with plans to head either south towards Victoria or to Perth. Like with the previous people, when the 2 women didn't return home, their families alerted police in both the UK and in Australia. Links were of course made between other missing backpackers, but things wouldn't come to a head until September 1992, when 2 men running in Belanglo State Forest discovered 2 bodies buried beneath leaves and sticks. They were the remains of Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters from Wales. Joanne was found first. Now, I found 3 differing reports about what had happened to her, but to be honest, whichever is accurate doesn't diminish how brutal her death was. Some reports say she was stabbed 14 times in the neck and torso. Some say she was stabbed 15 times in the neck, torso and back, and another said it was 21 times in the back and 14 in the chest. But like I said, either way, it's just horrible. Caroline had been found with a blindfold on and had been shot in the head 10 times. Officials believe she had been used for target practice because of the differing angles of the shots, and both women had also been assaulted. Aware of the 7 missing backpackers, authorities searched the surrounding area but found nothing in the following days, so the search and the case was halted for a while. 13 months later, a bushman named Bruce Pryor discovered and reported to the police 2 more bodies. They were the remains of James Gibson and Deborah Everest from Melbourne. James had been stabbed 8 times and had his upper spine cut, paralysing him, while Deborah had been severely and brutally beaten and stabbed. After this discovery, Detective Clive Small created the Task Force Air to recover further bodies which they believed to be in the surrounding woodlands and to find the killer. From the evidence, the way the victims had been killed and the items found both on and around the bodies, it made it really clear that they were dealing with a serial killer. A thorough search of Belanglo Forest was conducted, and on the 1st of November 1993, they found the remains of German Simone Schmidl. Again, Simone had been stabbed multiple times, and 2 of which had cut her spine, paralysing her, just like with James Gibson. I tell ya, this guy. 3 days later, on the 4th of November, a search team found 2 more bodies crudely buried, again in leaves and sticks. It was the German couple, Gabor Neugebauer and Anja Habschied. Gabor, like Caroline Clark, had been used for a sick version of target practice and had been shot multiple times in the head. Anja had been stabbed multiple times and had had her head removed, and sadly they never actually found Anja's head. Ivan Milat had violently abducted these victims, assaulted some, tortured others, and killed them in horrendous ways. Safe to say, police wanted to find the person responsible. The South Wales government issued a $500,000 Australian reward in relation to the killings, and the police developed a profile of the killer. In doing so, they found themselves with a long list of suspects, which they eventually narrowed from 230 to 32. Police were already aware of Ivan Milat, and he was very much on their radar. However, it wasn't until 3 phone calls that were made to the task force that he became the prime suspect. One call reported Milat as having a small arsenal of weapons at his home, and another was from a lady who in 1990 had had a run-in with a man named Paul Onions, who was a lucky survivor of one of Ivan Milat's attacks. In January of 1990, Paul Onions from the UK was hitchhiking through Australia and was offered a ride by a man calling himself Bill. At first, everything seemed fine, but things very quickly changed, and Paul grew concerned for his safety. At one point, Bill pulled the vehicle over and grabbed a length of rope and a gun. Paul Onions had trained and served with the Royal Marines, and his survival instincts kicked in instantly. He ran from the vehicle in a zigzag formation into oncoming traffic in the hopes of stopping someone who might help. He eventually stopped a car, jumped in the passenger side, and yelled at the woman driving, "He's got a gun," referring to Bill, who was now in pursuit. Bill, of course, turned out to be none other than Ivan Milat, and both the lady in the car and Paul Onions were 2 of the calls made to the task force reporting this incident. Paul Onions even flew back to Australia just to identify Ivan. Police decided to arrest Ivan Milat on the charges of attacking Paul, and afterwards they knew they would be able to search his property for evidence linking him to the 7 bodies found in Belanglo Forest. Weapons matching those used in the murders and belongings of the victims were found in Ivan's house, and, get this, the police also found photos of Ivan's girlfriend wearing clothing that belonged to one of the victims, Caroline Clark. I mean, it's a certain level of cold. Milat's trial began on the 26th of March 1996. Despite a large amount of strong evidence against him, Ivan never admitted to the murders, and apparently felt quite sure that he'd get off. But despite this, and members of his family trying to provide alibis, Ivan Milat was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Ivan remained there until the 27th of October 2019, when he died of stomach cancer. It is believed that Milat was responsible for numerous other deaths and/or disappearances. And with his death in 2019, it brings a reduced chance of finding out the truth and of closure for lots of the families of the victims who always hoped he would eventually tell the truth. As well as Ivan Milat, there was another true crime event that inspired writer Greg McLean, and that is the abduction and murder of British Peter Falconio and attempted assault of his girlfriend Joanna Lees. The young couple had been travelling through Asia and had moved on to Australia in January 2001. On July 14th, while travelling through the Northern Territory in a Volkswagen Kombi at 7:30 p.m. at night, they were approached by a man wearing a black baseball cap and driving a white pickup truck. He pulled them over on the pretense that their exhaust was sparking, and Peter got out of the Kombi to go speak with the man by the exhaust at the back of the vehicle. But once they were out of sight, Joanne heard a loud bang, and moments later the man came round to the front holding a pistol. The man tried to tie up Joanne and remove her from the van, but Joanne screamed, flailed around and kicked, trying to escape her captor. Frustrated by her fighting back, the man tied her hands with zip ties and eventually placed her under the canopy in the back of his truck. While lying there, Joanne heard the man return to the Kombi and drag something heavy across the floor, presumably the body of Peter Falconio. Joanne realised this was her only chance to make a break for it, so she slid over the side of the truck's back, ran and hid in some nearby tall bushes. Joanne stayed there until she was certain the man had left. He had driven off in his truck, then removed to move the Kombi, leaving once again. Eventually, Joanne was able to find help from a passing road train where the two men on board it cut off her zip ties and then took her to the police station. A search of the area was conducted for Peter Falconio, but he was sadly never found. The man guilty of the death of Peter Falconio and the attack on Joanne was a Bradley John Murdoch, a known thug, racist and bully. He had been a member of a criminal motorcycle gang, a wife-beater, a rapist, and had received a suspended sentence for killing a cyclist while driving dangerously. Basically an all-round lovely character. Through DNA and information divulged by a drug runner working with Murdoch, the police discovered that he was responsible for the attacks. He was extradited to Northern Territory and his trial began in October 2005. He was convicted of all the charges and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 28 years. Wolf Creek premiered at Sundance Film Festival on the 24th of January 2005. It was then released worldwide later the same year. Everywhere, that is, except for the Northern Territory, as the trial of Peter Falconio was still ongoing, having begun in October 2005. The decision to not release in the Northern Territory was done in part out of respect, but it was also done because the Northern Territory court had actually placed an injunction on the film's release there. There was concern that the film could have influenced the outcome of the trial. It's a fair enough point. On its release, Wolf Creek received mixed reviews. I mean, it's still sitting pretty snugly in that 50% 5 out of 10 middle ground. And while many praise the acting and setting, many others have highlighted and criticised the movie's realistic depictions of violence. I mean, Wolf Creek is bleak and relentless. Look, I'm interested in horror movies, brutal history and true crime. But on my first watch of this film, I thought, bit much. But as Dennis Harvey of Variety said, there's no question that what Wolf Creek sets out to do, it does alarmingly well. Well, there you go guys, that's the horrifying true story behind Wolf Creek. As always, let me know your thoughts on this episode down below in the comments. I mean, are you a fan of Wolf Creek? And even if you are a fan, do you feel like the realistic and brutal violence can be a little bit much at times? I'm not sure what my next episode will be. I know quite a few of you asked for the deep dive of The Thing, and I'm definitely going to do one. I just needed a break from the Monsters 101 deep dive rotation, but it is coming, as well as the Annabelle Truly Horror, which I keep promising, and the Evolution of Dracula. It's just that some of these episodes are a much bigger workload and take more time, and I want to do them properly. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, keep safe out there, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye guys.